Okay, good afternoon. It's about 1 o'clock. My name is Richard Burke. I'm the Executive Director of Western Liberty Network, and Victoria Volashina has just arrived. Western Liberty Network is a 501c3 organization, and that means we are nonpartisan. And so nothing that Western Liberty Network does is intended to endorse or oppose any candidate, political party, any legislation, or ballot measure. We provide training. It's available to everyone. And we do have guest trainers and various participants, as anyone viewing this recording will note. However, whatever comments they make are their own responsibility and may not necessarily reflect the views of Western Liberty Network. Western Liberty Network's website is www.westernlibertynetwork.org. I would encourage anyone participating or here with or observing this recording to visit it, particularly the training tab. The training tab is where almost all of our resources are. They're available to everyone free of charge. You can download as PDF files our various support training documents. And we also have these weekly trainings available for review as well. Just scroll down until you find the topic that you like. We do these trainings every Saturday, rain or shine, at 1 o'clock. And so people are always welcome to join. If you see value in what you see today, encourage you to go to the westernlibertynetwork.org website and go to the support tab. Contributions help make these trainings and other activities possible, and all of your contributions are tax deductible fully. So Donna has just entered the waiting room, so she is coming in now. And with that, I would like to turn the floor over to Mark Knudson. Mark Knudson and I have been friends for quite a while, but he always says I exaggerate, but he is a superstar when it comes to the topic of board staff governance. He was the CEO at Tualatin Valley Water District when I was there as a commissioner. He also has worked for the city of Gresham. He has many other qualifications that he may wish to share with you, and he has a lot to offer us. He's going to provide, as you can see on the screen, a slideshow today, and that slideshow already is available for download if you want to look at it as a PDF file, and when we put it on the training tab, it will be available there as well. So with that, I want to thank all of you for signing in. As more people arrive, I'll put them through, and I will turn over the meeting to my good friend, Mark Knudson.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Richard. A couple of things. One, I assume everybody can hear me. Just give me a thumbs up. We're good. All right. Awesome. Thank you. And when I went, yeah, thank you, Richard. When I went into this, I sort of was joking with my wife that, I wouldn't be surprised that we got 4 people that showed up. So you guys are awesome because you've already exceeded my expectations by at least like 25%. So that's just incredible. Thank you for being here today. I really, truly appreciate it. So Richard did ask me to talk about some of my experience in terms of board staff governance, sort of the relationship between elected officials and staff at any local government level. But I kind of turn it around a little bit, and from my perspective, it's really how can you make the most of your organization? If you were elected to serve in some capacity, they're really expecting you to be able to make something happen. And so my observations are largely one of how to leverage your position and achieve those goals. So I'll talk a little bit about the elected and staff relationship. A big part of it is just understanding the lay of the land, knowing the limitations and opportunities that you have. And then again, these strategies in terms of achieving your goals. A tad bit about me. So I'm old. I have 30 years of experience. And that's not true. It's really probably 40 years of experience in senior management roles, almost exclusively on the public agency side, Richard mentioned my experience with TVWD, Tualatin Valley Water District, the second largest water provider in the state, second only to the city of Portland. During that period of time, I served as the CEO of the organization for 6 years. Richard mentioned City of Gresham. Actually, it was the City of Portland. I was with the Portland Water Bureau for 22 years. I also have had a couple of stints in terms of private consulting as well. At the local level, I currently serve on the board of Oak Lodge Water Services. Oak Lodge serves about 30,000 people in unincorporated areas of Clackamas County. We're located between Milwaukee and Gladstone. We do water and wastewater services. It's actually an awesome organization and getting better by the day. I do a lot of volunteer work. I work for Business Oregon. That is the state's Oregon Economic Development Division. They basically do economic development throughout the state. And I serve in a couple of capacities on the board for the Infrastructure Finance Authority, which allocates big chunks of money throughout the state in terms of economic development and public works projects. And I also am the chair of the state's audit committee for Business Oregon. I've been involved in a lot of different professional associations, and I'm currently a management consultant for the Special Districts Association. My point in going through all of that is to sort of give you a sense that I truly have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of these kind of board staff relationships, what I've seen work, what I've seen totally crater in terms of significant challenges. Legal liability becomes a significant concern at these kind of levels. And so part of my tips are just based on that experience of trying to avoid those problems over time. Last but not least, the disclaimer that everything I say today is really my perspective. I don't represent any organization that I've referenced here in terms of any of the special districts or SDAO or it's basically you're hearing from me, not my organizations. So let's get started. When you think you're running for office or when you've been elected to office, it seems pretty straightforward in many respects. There's the public, there's the voters that put you into office. You serve in some elected capacity on a board or a council. You have a staff person who is either like the city manager, the general manager, the CEO of the organization, the point person that's in charge of the organization as in charge of staff. And then under that person is a staff for this organization, and they're often divided into maybe a couple of departments. If it's really small, there may be just one person. And if it's really large, again, at TVWD, we had 140 people scattered through 5 different departments in about 20 different divisions. So, it can vary all over the map, but it's kind of a linear organization: voters, board, manager, and staff. So that's pretty straightforward. Everybody can understand that. But it really quickly becomes complicated. And it doesn't matter the size of the organization, because whether it's counties, cities, special districts, they each have kind of their unique qualities, their unique requirements. Each board position, whether it's a council or a board or a commission, has its own responsibilities and particular assignments. One of the big areas that becomes a point of confusion is, well, what's the role of the chair or the mayor or the board president? Is that sort of got some superpower that other positions don't have? Typically, the answer is no, but it varies depending on the organization. And then there are folks that are elected versus appointed to serve on these boards. And again, I've been in both kinds of positions before, and they have different expectations associated with them. One of the unique things about elections is it kind of depends on who elected you. Some organizations have elections versus district or wards versus at-large positions. And so if you were elected by a ward or a district, you are responding to that certain, contingent of voters that voted for you. But if you're elected at large, you're responsible for the entire organization. And so you kind of put, different responsibilities on the elected position, depending on who those voters are that put them in position. And then the charter of the organization really becomes key, because certain organizations have certain charter requirements. Different cities, we'll pick on cities, they have different forms of city governance in terms of a strong mayor versus a weak mayor. And that really defines the levels of responsibility and authority that mayor has, and it varies by organization. And so understanding that becomes key. And then last but not least is really sort of, how does the organization operate? Well, some organizations really get it in terms of, the board or council makes the policy and we leave it to the staff to implement it. That's my preference in terms of how an organization should execute and implement policy. But not all organizations have either the luxury of a staff like that or have the history that they've operated that way. And so this reference to the Carver School of Governance is actually an idea that Richard had steered me towards many, many years ago. But it's basically a strategy of keeping the electeds at the policy level and using the staff as an implementation resource to put that policy into motion. So given all those complexities and sort of each one has its own unique nature, the good news is over the years, I've identified some overarching concepts. And again, these are sort of my observations of things that I've seen, really guidance in terms of keeping it in mind in terms of this responsibility that you were elected to serve. And the first and foremost is that your authority comes from the voters. It is the voters that put you into this position or will put you into this position, and you need to honor that and respect that. The power came from the voters. And in that capacity, you represent the public. I think all too often, particularly now, people sort of are representing their own interests, and that's fine to a point, but the public put you there, and you need to be in a position to represent the public, not just yourself. This third bullet is probably the piece that gets lost by most, particularly first-time or sort of inexperienced elected officials, that the direction, the policies, the strategic oversight of the organization is made by the board, not individual board members. Said a different way, your authority in this elected position is by the board, not as individuals. So, when it was at Portland, we always joked, well, it takes 3 votes to make a decision. And that's the fact of the matter is, you can have a great idea, but if you can't round up the 3 votes to support that position, it really goes nowhere. And so it's really critical to understand your authority is as a board, not as individuals. This fourth bullet, again, having served as a CEO of a large organization and reporting directly to a publicly elected board, I feel really strongly about this. Board has 1 employee. You could have an organization that has 200 employees, but the board has 1 employee, and that's the general manager or CEO. This is all about hierarchy and lines of authority. And what you don't want is board members working around the manager to be able to deal directly with staff. That's where a lot of the problems come from that I've seen, again, working with SDAO. That's where the wheels come off in a lot of situations, is you have elected officials dealing with 2nd or 3rd tier staff members, and they have the very best of intentions, but you've essentially undermined any authority that has been given to the general manager in a situation like that. And then I just, I'm obligated to point out that board members have a lot of obligations that they have to work within. There's a legal framework. There are laws and rules and regulations that govern how these things have to happen in terms of public bodies. And it's really critical that you be aware of those. So again, some concepts in terms of where the confusion comes from. Well, it really depends on the unique form of governance that exists within your particular organization. Different levels of authority that exist between chairs, commissions, boards, members. Everybody has different responsibilities in different organizations. And so it's really key to understand that for your particular organization. That's really what the second bullet says too. Areas where I've seen confusion over the years, and again, I have heard these are real quotes. I'm just trying to help. You have board members who really have the best of intentions. I just want to save us some money. I know a lot about this, and I'm just trying to share my expertise on this topic. Particularly true with professionals who get elected to positions. By the way, I'm an engineer. I've said this myself sometimes in terms of different roles. And again, these are very knowledgeable people that are there with the best of intentions to serve the organization. But the fact of the matter is, if you hear these kind of things, it means that the elected official is now dealing in implementation or, trying to direct the organization beyond just providing policy direction. Sometimes, not that long ago, I heard, well, gee, I was elected to make changes. We're out of control. Things have to happen around here. Yeah, that could be. But the way things are going to happen around here is through the board, not through an individual. It all comes back to that. Your authority exists as a board, not as any one individual. The individual doesn't get to make policy. The individual doesn't get to implement policy. It all comes from the board. And again, I talked about sort of short circuiting the manager. Again, sometimes you will hear an elected official say, gee, I was approached by Fred in the field that I should look into this. Boy, that's got like lawsuit written all over it when I hear that. Only from the standpoint that it's like somebody's going to get undermined in a deal like that. And you really need to be aware of that and not let that happen. Again, work it through the board, bring it to the board's attention. But the minute you start exercising authority as an individual, you're really undermining the strength of the board and the organization. So I mentioned all of the legal obligations. We're not going to talk about them, but the list is as long as your arm. There are all kinds of federal, state, local administrative rules that come into play, things like public meeting records. It's an area where, again, particularly small organizations that I deal with now really get tripped up. You've got to, you can't make decisions outside of a public meeting environment. That means that those conversations have to not only be held in front of the public, but also that meeting gets advertised and noticed in such a way that conforms with the state meeting rules. That's just one requirement. Then there are the public records. Everything has to be recorded and presented to satisfy the public records requirements. And if the public wants a record in terms of what did you spend on potato chips last year, if that's a record, they can request it and you have to produce it. There's, Richard is awesome in terms of his experience with the State Ethics Commission, and he could go on and on about this. It's a really stringent requirement. I recently came across a situation where a particular service district on the coast was providing a service discount to their board members. It's like, God, you can't do that because that is you just simply can't do it because that's a benefit that is now being made available to an elected official that is only receiving that benefit because of their position on the board. That is an ethics violation. You got to be aware of all of this stuff. And then when you get into sort of the moving pieces, the employment stuff in terms of Fair Labor Standards Act, the Family Medical Leave Act, Oregon Family Leave Act, which has additional requirements beyond FMLA, equal employment opportunities. At TBWD, we had 3 full-time HR professionals just sorting out this particular line item in terms of all of the obligations that we had to deal with and make sure that we were satisfying. We had another individual whose full-time responsibility was OSHA compliance and workplace safety. So it gets complicated, particularly as you have a larger organization, and far be it from an elected official who has no background to begin to weigh into these issues. Budget law, this is budget season in special districts. Budget law is a very complex process. There is a very prescriptive set of rules and requirements that go into not only, what can and can't be in the budget, but the budget formation process itself in terms of the required public meetings, the notice requirements, how the thing gets published, how it's approved, how it's adopted. All of those, you got to have trained professionals in place to be able to make sure that happens according to satisfy all the obligations that you have. And then there's running the business itself. There's water regulations versus drinking water regulations. There's specific requirements associated with how you run a library. Go figure. But being aware of your particular industry's requirements is really key. As if that really weren't enough, then on top of all of that, there are other fiscal obligations. So if the organization has any debt at all, there are probably covenants associated with that debt, which are specific restrictions on, for example, having coverage to be able to pay the debt in the event of a default. Those bond covenants may sort of dictate that you've got a pot of money that's available to the organization. I have literally had members of the organization, the board, say, well, gee, we could just use that money. No, you can't, not without violating the restrictions that are in place in the debt that you've already used to be able to finance improvements. So those covenants become strict regulations that you have to adhere, even though they aren't law per se. Same kind of thing exists with insurance in terms of how you conduct your organization. Existing contracts, you have, certain contract obligations you have to honor. There's certain accounting standards. That's what GASB and GAAP are all about, is accounting standards in terms of how all that information gets recorded on the books. And then if you're a represented organization, if you have a labor agreement, then you've got to follow all of those things as well. And so again, imagine an newly elected board member who wants to sort of provide direction at staff level and isn't aware of certain requirements under the labor agreement, or who says, gee, we shouldn't have to pay, additional overtime for standby time. No, it's in the labor agreement, and that's what we're going to do. And that's why we're budgeting it the way we do. So lots of complexities, lots of things that require taking the time to understand. So that really all gets down to understanding the nuts and bolts of the organization. And that's why things like, I've often felt the first year or 2 years, depending on the term of an elected official's tenure, is really just spent coming up to speed on all this stuff. It's really hard to be effective in terms of creating change when you're still learning all the limitations associated with things like the charter requirement, bond covenants, insurance requirements, meeting procedures. This stuff takes time to get up to speed. And so the opportunity to become effective is learning this stuff in advance. And one of my tips is to go to meetings and get involved in the organization well before you ever think you're going to run for election, to begin to get the lay of the land on all of this stuff, because this is the stuff that If you come in charging to make change, this is the stuff that you will swear is just slowing you down. But these are obligations that just simply are immovable, unchangeable. And to that end, you just need to figure out how to work with them. So making the most of your position, get up to speed, learn and study the organization, serve in appointed positions. You know, in city framework, or even with districts, it's all about like serving on the budget committee. You know, in our special district, we work hard to bring prospective future board members to get them to serve on the budget committee. What better way to learn about the organization than to serve on the budget committee? You see the finances, you get exposed to the public meeting and public records requirements. Same thing is true in a city environment in terms of serving on the planning commission. These are all typically appointed positions, and so great way to learn about the organization without sort of the burden of trying to get elected. One of the things that I think a lot of organizations miss out on is this whole concept of orientation of new members. Somebody gets elected or appointed. The best that I've seen was multiple meetings with multiple staff members over a series of a couple of months to be able to get them up to speed in terms of the nature of the organization. You know, it sounds burdensome, but that's how you overcome this sort of infrastructure requirements associated with the nature of these organizations. It's sort of like gets down to communicate, clarifying the roles and responsibilities of board positions versus the general manager. That orientation process really needs to focus on, you know, the limitations of the board roles and the expectations associated with the staff roles. Being clear about that on an ongoing basis really goes a long ways towards overcoming the gaps that can exist in terms of who's going to do what and how come I can't call the shots, even though I'm the elected official. Have a plan. I'm a firm believer in strategic planning for organizations. One of the real challenges is, let's say there's a board and the board has 5 members. Those 5 members may each have 3 or 4 different sets of priorities and objectives that they want to accomplish during their limited tenure on the board. And so now you've got, 5 people with, let's say, 4 different sets of priorities. Suddenly you're trying to do 20 things at once. And there's frustration because 18 of those things aren't happening. What's the deal? Well, that's where working as a board and having a common set of goals and priorities really becomes key in setting the vision and direction and priorities for the organization. Because if you don't have that kind of alignment at the board level, everything seems like it should be a high priority. And if everything's a high priority, nothing's going to get done. Trust me, I have seen it happen many, many times. So that strategic planning process, and again, people are critical. Well, we had a retreat. Well, I'm sorry, but that's where you have an opportunity to come together as a board and have a discussion about what are our organizational priorities. And oh, by the way, you might listen to staff in that conversation because they have some pretty good insight in terms of what the needs of the organization are as well. The last big pitch I have in terms of making the most of your position is looking for partnerships. So I'm a big believer in partnerships, not only between board members, it's like making sure that I've got some allies on the board, right? Because you got to get to 3 votes. And so how do you get to 3 votes? Well, it's not just good ideas, it's also relationships. Build those relationships with your other board members. Build that relationship with the manager so that you know how you can work together and maximize that relationship. And last but not least is also relationships with other similar organizations. Again, I'll talk about Oak Lodge. Oak Lodge, we have a partnership that now exists for a water supply with a city and another special district. We have partnerships that exist in terms of things like water conservation throughout the Portland metropolitan region. These things provide tremendous leverage in terms of those partnerships that allow an individual member to do things that frankly we wouldn't be able to do acting as just an individual organization, but working together with our partners and finding that common ground, we can really do a lot more to make a difference to our community. This is more about sort of my perspective on guiding an organization. And this is probably more from the CEO perspective than it is the board perspective. But I'm a firm believer in an environment of accountability. And that's accountability for the board members, the manager, and the staff. If you have clarity in terms of these expectations, if you've done this retreat, if you're clear in terms of the one employee model, in terms of how we're going to do business as a board, then when a board member goes sideways, goes rogue, not that that would ever happen, then you've got basically an opportunity to call BS and say, look, we had this conversation. We agreed we'd have one employee. We agreed we'd all work together as a board, and you're going sideways on me. What's with that? Those are hard conversations, but if you don't have those conversations, individuals will go rogue. Individuals that, the wheels will come off at some point. Trust me, it really does happen. And so if you have clarity in terms of the goals and the expectations, then you can exercise accountability. If you don't have that clarity, then everybody's kind of like the wild, wild west, and it's kind of free game. Remember, going back, it was the public, it was the voters that put you in this position. And so I'm a firm believer in comprehensive two-way communication with the public, both letting them know what it is that your organization is up to and the progress that you're making, but also hearing from them. What are their priorities? If you're going to create a set of priorities for the organization, it hopefully is founded by, input from the public, because they're ultimately funding it. It's the public's organization, and you're working for the public in this capacity. And so you really need to be mindful of giving them the opportunity to weigh in terms of what those priorities are and what they want. I mentioned partnerships and alliances, but partnering with other organizations to give you leverage, take advantage of economies of scale. So much of what I do is, infrastructure, public infrastructure, water, wastewater systems. There is such huge economies of scale in terms of the nature of this kind of infrastructure, and you can really leverage that through these partnerships. And then last but not least, it's an investment. It is all about taking care of the organization and making investments in the individuals as well as the organization. This new member orientation thing takes time, takes staff time to get organized and make it happen, takes elected time to participate in that process. But I'm telling you, it's essential to be able to establish this foundation that everybody can work from. And then making ongoing investments in terms of board members, managers, staff. One of the things that often comes up is, well, we need to make budget cuts. And what's the first thing that gets cut is training. And it's kind of easy because, it's like, well, the wheels don't come off if we don't if we don't go to that conference this particular year. And that's true, that's fine. But that's also where staff, and particularly the board, gets exposed to some creative ideas in terms of how to continue to either work together, improve the organization, new initiatives, new regulatory challenges that are coming down the road. And that's how you stay in front of those challenges rather than reacting to those challenges after the fact. And so I'm a big believer in the importance of ongoing investments in training and particularly board development. So trying to stay in front of it before things really go sideways. Well, again, I mentioned I'm big on infrastructure, and I apply the same kind of model, which is it's all about preventative maintenance. Just like you change the oil in your car, you have to make investments in maintenance with board members, with staff, and with how they work together in terms of the relationships. You can't, you can't rely on a meeting that might be once a month to cultivate the kind of relationship that you need with another board member if you're going to have a successful alliance with them. It requires, cup of coffee every couple of weeks, checking in. Did you hear what so-and-so said during the meeting? How do we feel about that? And this is not about what's called a serial meeting where we're making decisions outside of the public eye. That's a no-no. But in terms of having coordination with your peers on the board so that you kind of understand where everybody's coming from and how we can work together and be successful, that's particularly effective. And again, so you focus on the relationship side. We'll deal with the policy at the policy meetings and the public meetings, but let's work together at the relationship side so that we're working as a team and hitting on all cylinders when we get into that public meeting. Again, I talked about accountability. You can't hardly do enough. And that, that includes things like performance reviews. Of course, it's interesting. Again, I work for SDAO. One of the biggest challenges that special districts have is the lack of performance evaluations, particularly of general managers. Why is that a big deal? Well, first of all, it's how you give feedback and help shape the direction of the organization. But it's even more important if things go sideways and you need to make a change or you need to sort of deal with the fact that you've got a problem employee, documenting that history of performance becomes critical so that you can be clear that it's like, well, we said that we were supposed to do these things. Now here it is a year later and you haven't done those things. Then you've got a basis to move forward with making change. If you've never said anything and you want to suddenly say, time for a new direction, man, it's really tough given all of the sort of employment rules that exist to be able to just pull the trigger and make that kind of change. Same thing is true with staff. And frankly, the same thing is true with board members in terms of, if things really go sideways and you've got a rogue board member, you need to have documented the fact that you're trying to work with them over time. So look and listen for the warning signs. If you've got, staff members working directly with individual board members, or, you're going to meetings and you're finding out about stuff for the first time, those are warning signs that things are happening behind the scenes that aren't really, particularly on the up and up and are really eroding the success of the organization. Communicate, a lot of dialogue. I mean, you can't over communicate on this stuff. And then this action plan, again, the strategic plan, the commitments that we're going to make in terms of priorities and investments that we're going to make both financially as well as investments in our people, really key to have a clear understanding and common understanding of those goals. And last but not least, I love to make reference to seeking professional assistance. Now, I know of one organization right now that's saying, oh, well, I can take care of it. They have a significant personnel problem. They want to believe they can take care of it themselves. And I'm telling you, these issues are complicated enough that you just really don't want to assume you can solve those problems yourself. So rely on the AOC is the Association of Oregon Counties, LOC, League of Oregon Cities, SDAO, Special Districts Association. There's even an organization for like libraries, an organization for school districts. Rely on those organizations because they have professionals. Some of them are attorneys, some of them are HR people, but you're probably paying a membership to one of those one or more of those organizations. Utilize that resource and bring them in before things go horribly wrong, because you can potentially avoid a lawsuit, potentially avoid a significant claim, and deal with it in a way that is really going to minimize the liability of the district or the organization that you're working for. So really don't be shy about pulling the trigger on asking for help, sending up the flare. And then last but not least, of course, consultants and attorneys. Anybody on the call an attorney? God, I hope not. But the point is, Yeah, they provide a key role. They're an essential resource. But, if you're calling the attorney, it's probably too late, right? So hopefully you take preventative maintenance actions before it gets to the point where you're having to call the attorney. But if you need to call the attorney, goodness sakes, call the attorney. So, I wrapping things up. In summary, most important points to me, the directions, the policy, the oversight, it's all made by the board. It's not individuals. It's 5 votes, but one organization, and that direction comes from the board. You have to understand the legal and fiscal constraints associated with being on that board and the board's role within the organization and within the community. If you take anything away from this talk today, a board has one employee, and that's the general manager or CEO. No reaching around the general manager to deal with line staff. It is a recipe for disaster. Take the time to get oriented, to really understand the roles and responsibilities of the organization, sort of the professional duties that come along with, how you serve the community in whatever capacity that is. And really understanding the norms of the organization, because you're going to work within that to affect the change that you're trying to make. Look for strategic alliances at the board level, relationships with other board members, relationships with the general manager, relationships with outside organizations, whether they're other, similar organizations, other cities, other groups. Those strategic alliances give you leverage to be able to make the kind of changes that you might want to achieve. Practice preventative maintenance. Again, think about it as changing the oil in your car. You just have to invest in your organization and make those kind of commitments to maintenance on an ongoing basis. Hold people accountable. To hold people accountable, they've got to have clarity in terms of the expectations. Set those expectations up front, and then don't be shy about pointing out that people have sort of gotten outside the lines in terms of those expectations, and hold them accountable in a positive kind of way. And how do we come back and achieve that goal that we've all agreed we were going to work towards? And then last but not least, communicate with the board so that everybody kind of is moving in the same direction. Communicate with the general manager or CEO so that he understands he is following the direction of the board. And communicate with the citizens that put you in this awesome position so that you're representing their interests and they understand what you're providing in terms of benefits back to the community. So that's as good as it gets. And with that, I'm happy to field questions, comments, concerns. We can engage in some dialogue for a few minutes. You're on mute, Richard. You're still muted.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm not muted.
There you go.
Being muted, that's a rare situation for me. But
people have tried for years.
I've tried for many years, yes. So if any of the people participating would like to ask a question, they will also have to unmute themselves. I think I saw that Victoria had her hand up. Go ahead and unmute yourself and go for it.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mark, for the great presentation. I am curious. So I see that citizens, they must be communicated to, as I understand. And at what point are they part of the process, if they are at all, to make decisions?
So, that's an awesome question, Victoria, because, there's a significant difference between public information and public involvement. And again, this is a philosophical issue on my part. I am all about providing that information, providing a two-way dialogue in terms of public information. And so share what's going on, listen in terms of those opinions. But at the end of the day, the elected official was elected to make the decision, not the public. And to that end, you listen, you understand, and then the elected official makes the decision. And so it's really key to not, and again, my bias, to not cede that decision authority to the public as a whole. If they want to have that opportunity to make that decision, they should run for the board, run for election, right? But short of that, then convey their concerns. But, and Richard can speak to this better than anybody, you weigh, you balance, you listen to that input, and your job as an elected official is to then render a decision that strikes the best interests of the community as a whole. So often, the folks that show up to these meetings may be kind of the squeaky wheels of the community. They may be, wanting to make noise about one particular issue, and that's ultimately not in the best interest of the community as a whole, but they feel a lot of passion about that. And that's awesome. That's great. They deserve to be listened to, but you got to weigh and balance that. And is that perspective in the best interest of the community as a whole? That's why the public official retains the decision authority. Richard, comments on that?
Yeah, you're going to take heat because, you're not going to try to please everyone. And if you are the kind of person that wants to please everyone, you probably shouldn't run for a board position. Certainly shouldn't run for a staff position. But I've had when I ran for re-election on the water board, I think it was my fourth time. I had some people run a $12,000 negative campaign against me because of some votes that I had cast that I believed were in the interest of the board. If you're a member of a cemetery control board or a mosquito control board, that's unlikely to happen. But if you're a school board member, or I guess even a water board member, you have to be ready for that. And one thing I would recommend is when these things happen, don't take it personally. It's not personal. It's really important that you realize that people who criticize you, or even people who say good things about you, don't necessarily know anything about you. And you're a volunteer, you're going to be doing the best you can to make the best decision you can. And if someone says, well, you're a lying, no good so-and-so and all that kind of thing, and they do a $10,000 direct mail campaign saying how awful you are, most people can just see right through that. And just don't let it bother you. Just be secure in the fact that you're doing the best you can with people. And Mark is right. When people come to you, listen to them. Maybe you disagree with them 9 out of 10 times, but maybe 1 out of 10, they'll have something that is of value that you want to implement into your governance or talk to other board members about. So, and above all, let this be fun. There's no reason why this can't be fun. Doing the public's work, you're getting to know people, you're getting to know other board members, staff members, you're dealing with different kinds of people that you'd never otherwise meet. Enjoy them, enjoy the relationships, and have fun doing what you do. And when things get stormy, just let it roll off your back and do the best you can.
Yeah, you're in these kind of positions, you're working for the public, and the public put you there. And if the public strongly disagrees with your decision and they ultimately decide they don't want you there anymore, they get that choice. That's how our sort of form of government works. And I respect that. That's great. And so, the public giveth and the public taketh away. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what makes us, the kind of country that we are today.
Lynette, you have a question. I saw your hand pop up. You'll have to unmute yourself, Lynette. Or maybe you put your hand up by mistake. There we go.
It was by mistake. It was by mistake, sorry.
Okay, that happens. I've done that many times. I've put my hand up when I should.
I'm in good company. I'm in good company then.
Yeah, that's right. Asher, John, Donna, do you have any questions?
I don't.
Okay, looks like. Oh, go ahead, Victoria. You have another one.
Yes, I do. Any funny stories, fun or funny from your time? Any crazy stories that you might share?
The craziest story, at TVWD, I had a board member who was functioning as the board president, and he was, is very much a free spirit, and he made the meetings fun. And so we're doing this thing where, we were all about promoting sort of freeze protection. We're moving into winter, and we're working hard at trying to promote, get your home winterized so that we don't have frozen pipes. And we handed out, made available to the public, those little faucet covers that you can put on, your outside hose bibs to protect them from freezing. And this really awesome board president took this faucet cover, put it on his head, and said, "Look, I'm Devo." And you kind of had to be there to see it. But the point is that Richard's absolutely right. Make it fun. The reality is you have to be able to enjoy these opportunities, and again, do the public's good and serve the public in the ways that you are asked to do so. But it doesn't all have to be cold, dried public meetings. You can provide some enjoyment and entertainment as you go along to be able to make the most of the situation. That's probably not the best story, but that's the only public story that I can tell.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Mark. Although I love Devo, I don't want to hear anyone say anything bad about Devo. We've had a lot of fun. When we went to the American Water Works Association conventions, we had a wonderful time meeting people, spending time together. And when I retired, I was given a very special meeting where everyone wore a Star Trek badge, and we had a Star Trek cake, and I got a Star Trek bottle opener. I mean, these things can none of which went over the ethics lines. But these things are a lot of fun. But there are times that are very tense too, like when fluoride would come up, whether or not to remove fluoride. We had one section of our district that has fluoride, another section that didn't have fluoride, and every few years it would come up as a big topic, and it would fill the room, and there would be wildly passionate people on both sides of the issues, and navigating that is very, very tough. Dealing with reporters to make sure that they get things accurately. We have a training on dealing with reporters, is a challenge. This is very serious work. Have fun with it, but don't make light of it. That's the one thing that I would say. And if we were meeting at a bar, if we were at a bar right now and having a beer or two, there are a lot of stories I think we could all tell. Maybe one of these days I'll get a chance to tell some of the really good ones. But anyhow, serving is an honor, and it's fun, but it's an honor and it's rewarding. And I'm hoping that everyone here chooses at some point to serve on an appointed or an elected position. There are 3,500 elected positions out there up for election this May 18th. And there are just as many appointed positions available for which many people, for which nobody files for in a lot of cases. A lot of these positions that nobody files for, you can win with 3 write-in votes. But what I'm hoping that you folks will do is, I know that it's a nice sunny day and our attendance is a little lower than what it usually is. But I know that all of you know people. I know that Victoria knows people with Slavic Vote. Lynette and Donna know a lot of people in the conservative movement. Asher, I think you do too. Let people know about this particular training. I mean, all of our trainings have some value, but as we approach the local nonpartisan elections and people are running for these local offices and have an opportunity to get appointed to office, this is a particularly good one. So ask them to come to the westernlibertynetwork.org website, go to the training tab and scroll down until they find this particular training, and maybe they'll also see some other things that they like.
A question for the group. I mean, was this worthwhile? Did you learn something today? I mean, good.
I'm getting some nods. So
Good.
that's good. Oh, a thumbs up.
Especially from the people that don't have their cameras on.
That's right.
Okay, super. Well, I truly appreciate the opportunity. It's fun. It's always a great reminder for me. And if you've gotten something out of it, I truly hope you're able to use it somewhere down the road.
Okay, very good. I want to thank Mark for his time. His time is very valuable, and
Thank you.
I really think he did a wonderful job. You're awesome. I'll call you next week, Mark.
Okay,
And
I'm around.
let's follow up. The rest of you folks, let's follow up next week and see what we can do to help some of these people who are running for office get some of this good information. And with that, unless anyone has anything else for the good of the order, we will call it a meeting. We've got a chat. Somebody put something up on chat.
Yeah, some good feedback. I truly appreciate that. Thank you.
Very good. All right. Thank you very much. And God bless everyone. Take care.
See ya.